Welcome back to Signet Classics, mini chapter 5, page 53 in the middle. And C-May, Winston has some strong opinions about him. He thinks he's going to be vaporized before any of his predictions come true. Middle 53, people. Winston had finished his bread and cheese. He turned a little sideways in his chair to drink his mug of coffee. At the table on his left, the man with the strident voice was still talking remorselessly away. A young woman who was perhaps his secretary and who was sitting with her back to Winston was listening to him and seemed to be eagerly agreeing with everything that he said. From time to time, Winston caught some such remark as, "I think you're so right. I do so agree with you," uttered in a youthful and rather silly feminine voice. But the other voice never stopped for an instant, even when the girl was speaking. Winston knew the man by sight, though he knew no more about him than that he held some important post in the fiction department. He was a man of about 30, with a muscular throat and a large mobile mouth. His head was thrown back a little, and because of the angle at which he was sitting, his spectacles caught the light and presented to Winston two blank discs instead of eyes. Top of 54. What was slightly horrible was that from the stream of sound that poured out of his mouth, it was almost impossible to distinguish a single word. Just once Winston caught a phrase, "complete and final elimination of Goldsteinism," jerked out very rapidly and, as it seemed, all in one piece, like a line of typecast solid. So if you think you're going to have Goldstein anything, if you're going to have the hate by the S of step, big lie, boogeyman, mark that page, sticky note that page.
What page are we on right now?
54. If you are a corner book bender, will you please do that just temporarily, unbend it, and then replace it with a sticky note? I do that sometimes, but I always just do it for temporary. Do this too. Complete and final elimination of Goldsteinism, jerked out very rapidly and, as it seemed, all in one piece, like a line of typecast solid. For the rest, it was just a noise, a quick quacking, and yet, though he could not actually hear what the man was saying, you could not be in any doubts about his general nature. He might be denouncing Goldstein and demanding sterner measures against thought criminals and saboteurs. He might be fulminating against the atrocities of the Eurasian army. He might be praising Big Brother or the heroes on the Malabar front. It made no difference. Whatever it was, you could be certain that every word of it was pure orthodoxy, pure ingsoc. As he watched the eyeless face with the jaw moving rapidly up and down, Winston had a curious feeling that this was not a real human being, but some kind of dummy. It was not the man's brain that was speaking. It was his larynx. The stuff that was coming out of him consisted of words, but it was not speech in the true sense. It was a noise uttered in unconsciousness, like the quacking of a duck. C-May had fallen silent for a moment, and with the handle of his spoon was tracing patterns in the puddle of stew. The voice from the other table quacked rapidly on, easily audible in spite of the surrounding din. "There is a word in Newspeak," said C-May. "I don't know whether you know it. Duck speak. To quack like a duck. It is one of those interesting words that have two contradictory meanings. Applied to an opponent, it is abuse. Applied to someone you agree with, it is praise." Back and forth, duality. Unquestioningly, C-May will be vaporized. Winston thought again. He thought it with a kind of sadness, although well knowing that C-May despised him and slightly disliked him, and was fully capable of denouncing him as a thought criminal if he saw any reason for doing so. So everyone can turn everyone else in. And it's all I gotta do is say, "I think they wrote some words in a journal," and boom, vaporized. That's a lot of power to give your citizens. And wouldn't that make you fear your fellow citizens, your neighbors? You wouldn't wave at your neighbor just willy-nilly, "Hey, how's it going, taking your garbage out?" You'd be scared to death of them. There was something subtly wrong with C-May. There was something that he lacked. Top of 55, discretion, aloofness, a sort of saving stupidity. You could not say that he was unorthodox. He believed in the principles of Ingsoc. He venerated Big Brother. He rejoiced over victories. He hated heretics against Ingsoc, not merely with sincerity, but with a sort of restless zeal, an up-to-dateness of information which the ordinary party member did not approach. Yet a faint air of disreputability always clung to him. He said things that would have been better unsaid. He had read too many books. He frequented the Chestnut Tree Cafe, haunt of painters and musicians. There was no law, not even an unwritten law, against frequenting the Chestnut Tree Cafe, yet the place was somehow ill-omened. The old, discredited leaders of the party had been used to gather there before they were finally purged. Goldstein himself, it was said, had sometimes seen there. Mark Goldstein right there, please, people. Middle 55. It was said, had sometimes been seen there years and decades ago. Seamay's fate was not difficult to foresee, and yet it was a fact that if Seamay grasped, even for 3 seconds, the nature of his, Winston's secret opinions, he would betray him instantly to the thought police. So would anybody else, for that matter, but Seamay more than most. Zeal was not enough. Orthodoxy was unconsciousness. The more you're unconscious, the more you numb yourself on TikTok and Reels. Because that's what you're doing. You're numbing yourself to reality. And then this is what happens. Seamay looked up. Here comes Parsons. Here comes Parsons, he said. Something in the tone of his voice seemed to add that bloody fool. Parsons, Winston, fellow tenant at Victory Mansions, was in fact threading his way across the room, a tubby, middle-sized man with fair hair and a frog-like face. At 35, he was already putting on rolls of fat at neck and waistline, but his movements were brisk. Oh, crap.
Lost your spot.
Yes. Tubby middle has frog-like face. 35, he was already putting on rolls. Both. His movements were brisk and boyish. His whole appearance was that of a little boy grown large, so much so that although he was wearing the regulation overalls, it was almost impossible not to think of him as being dressed in blue shorts, gray shirt, and a red neckerchief of the spies. In visualizing him, one saw always a picture of dimpled knees and top of 56 and sleeves rolled back from pudgy forearms. Parsons did indeed invariably revert to shorts when a community hike or any other physical activity gave him an excuse for doing so. He greeted them both with a cheery "hello, hello," and sat down at the table, giving off an intense smell of sweat. Beads of moisture stood out all over his pink face. Do you think I'm good at English accent? I'm bad. But Orwell made me speak it much better right there with spelling. Isn't that an interesting power?
I want to know your opinions on this because some people have stated that it is less of to write out people's accents or that it could be offensive or something and make it unreadable for some people. But I think it's a very important part of writing dialogue.
I think it's an absolute necessity
I think if you're
of character
to,
building.
like, make fun of the accent, that could be.
It's
kind
hard,
of problematic.
especially when you're not a part of. If you're writing a minority who has an accent and you're not a part of that minority, then it's hard to be sure whether or not you're writing it appropriately or not.
I mean,
But I think it is important so that the readers can understand what the person sounds like.
yeah. I mean, I've seen a lot of books where there are characters that are part of minorities, and then in like the where they acknowledge like here's everyone that helped me thanks to my.
They're portrayed as a person.
Yeah, they're instead of just saying oh they're just your normal white non-minority, but we've said that they're not.
I think it breathes life
Yeah.
into the character. Beads of moisture stood out all over his pink face. His powers of sweating were extraordinary. At the community center, you could always tell when he had been playing table tennis by the dampness of the bat handle. Seamay had produced a strip of paper on which there was a long column of words and was studying it with an ink pencil between his fingers. Look at him working away in our lunch hour. said Parsons, nudging Winston. Keenness, eh? What have you got there, old boy? Something a bit too brainy for me, I expect. Smith, old boy, I'll tell you why I'm chasing you. It's that sub you forgot to give me. Which sub is that? Said Winston, automatically feeling for money. About a quarter of one's salary had to be earmarked for voluntary subscriptions, which were so numerous that it was difficult to keep track of them. For Hate Week, you know, the House by House Fund. I'm treasurer for our block. We're making an all-out effort, going to put on a tremendous show, I tell you. It won't be my fault if old Victory Mansions doesn't have the biggest outfit of flags in the whole street. $2 you promised me. Winston found it and handed over 2 creased and filthy notes, which Parsons entered in a small notebook in the neat handwriting of the illiterate.
I have a lot of thoughts on speak right as a concept right now.
Do you think they allow they teach their citizens to read and write? That's a real easy way to hold down a population.
Like, obviously they know how to communicate, but
by the way, old boy, I hear that little beggar of mine let fly at you with his catapult yesterday. So here's the neighbor. I gave him a good dressing down for it. In fact, I told him I'd take the catapult away if he does it again. I think he was a little upset at not going to the execution, said Winston. Ah, well, top of 57. What I mean to say shows the right spirit, doesn't it? Mischievous little beggars they are, both of them. But talk about keenness. All they think about is the spies and the war, of course. Do you know what that little girl of mine did last Saturday when her troop was on a hike out of Berkhamsted way? She got 2 other girls to go with her, slipped off from the hike, and spent the whole afternoon following a strange man. They kept on his tail for 2 hours, right through the woods, and then, when they got into a meerschaum, handed him over to the patrols. What did they do that for? Said Winston, somewhat taken aback. Parsons, the neighbor in the apartment building, went on triumphantly. My kid made sure he was some kind of enemy agent. Might have been dropped by parachute, for instance. But here's the point, old boy. What do you think put her onto him in the first place? She spotted he was wearing a funny kind of shoes. Said she'd never seen anyone wearing shoes like that before. So the chances were he was a foreigner. Pretty smart for a nipper of 7, eh? What happened to the man? Ah, that I couldn't say, of course. But I wouldn't be altogether surprised if... Parsons made the motion of aiming a rifle and clicking his tongue for the explosion. Good, said C-May abstractedly without looking up from his strip of paper. Of course, we can't afford to take any chances, agreed Winston dutifully. What I mean to say, there is a war on, said Parsons. As though in confirmation of this, a trumpet call floated from the telescreen just above their heads. Winston, it was not... However, it was not the proclamation of a military victory this time, but merely an announcement from the Ministry of Plenty. Okay, extreme nationalism, hype, always hype the police and military. Blue Lives Matter, kids, right? Comrades, cried an eager, youthful voice. Attention, comrades. We have glorious news for you. We have won. Somebody write this page number down so we can get it on the board later. We have won a battle for production. Oh, we're gonna have a big wheat harvest this year, prediction, and then make sure the dictator gets the prediction right later. Returns now completed of the output of all classes of consumption goods shows that the standard of living has risen by no less than 20% over the past year. All over Oceania this morning, there were impressible spontaneous demonstrations when workers marched out of factories and offices and paraded through the streets with banners voicing their gratitude to Big Brother for the new, happy life which his wise leadership has bestowed upon us. Cult of personality. Here are some of the completed figures, foodstuffs. The phrase of our new happy life recurred several times, and it had been a favorite of late with the Ministry of Plenty. Parsons, his attention caught by the trumpet call, sat listening with a sort of gaping solemnity, a sort of edified boredom. He could not follow the figures, but he was aware that they were in some way a cause for satisfaction. He had lugged out a huge and filthy pipe, which already had full of charred tobacco. With a tobacco ration at 100 grams a week, it was seldom possible to fill a pipe up to the top. Winston was smoking his victory cigarette, which he held carefully horizontal. The new ration did not start till tomorrow, and he had only 4 cigarettes left. For the moment, he had shut his ears to the remoter noises and was listening to the stuff that streamed out of the telescreen. It appeared that there had even been demonstrations to thank Big Brother. So demonstrations not against, but to celebrate for raising the chocolate ration to 20 grams a week. And only yesterday, he reflected, it had been announced that the ration was to be reduced to 20 grams a week. Was it possible that they could swallow that after only 24 hours? Yes, they swallowed it. Parsons swallowed it easily, with the stupidity of an animal. The eyeless creature at the other table swallowed it fanatically, passionately. Cult of personality, you're swallowing it stupidly like an animal, fanatically. Fan. With a furious desire to track down, denounce, and vaporize anyone who should suggest that last week the ration had been 30 grams. So Winston remembers all this stuff because he's the one that has to erase the history. CMA 2, in some more complex way involving doublethink, CMA swallowed it, swallowed the lie. Was he then alone in the possession of a memory? Ooh, what's time?
55.
That's such a big paragraph. Okay, the one to get to 60, top of 60, can we do it? The fabulous statistics continue to pour out of the telescreen. I wish it didn't take me 5 minutes to get the rhythm. You notice how it takes me 5 minutes to get the rhythm, and once I get it, it's just like, boom. Because, like, I get the rhythm, and then, okay, time to leave. Fabulous statistics continue to pour out of the telescreen. As compared to last year, there was more food, more clothes, more houses, more furniture, more cooking pots, more fuel, more ships, more helicopters, more books, more babies, more of everything except disease, crime, and insanity. Year by year, God, please be marking these pages. I don't know. I don't have time. Year by year and minute by minute, everybody and everything was whizzing rapidly upwards as Simi had done earlier. Winston had taken up his spoon and was dabbing in the pale-colored gravy that dribbled across the table, drawing a long streak of it into a pattern. He meditated resentfully on the physical texture of life. Had it always been like this? Had food always tasted like this? He looked around the canteen, a low-ceilinged crowd did room, its walls grimy with the contact of innumerable bodies, battered metal tables and chairs placed so close together that you sat with elbows touching, bent spoons, dented trays, coarse white mugs, all surfaces greasy, grime in every crack, and a sourish composite smell of bad gin and bad coffee and metallic stew and dirty clothes. Always in your stomach and in your skin there was a sort of protest, a feeling that you had been cheated of something that you had a right to. This is the parts like this that are scary to me. They make my stomach hurt. It was true that he had no memories of anything greatly different in any time that he could accurately remember. There had never been quite enough to eat. One had never had socks or underclothes that were not full of holes. Furniture had always been battered and rickety, rooms underheated, tube trains crowded, houses falling to pieces, bread dark-colored, tea a rarity, coffee filthy tasting, cigarettes insufficient, nothing cheap and plentiful except synthetic gin. And though, of course, it grew worse as one's body aged, was it not a sign that this was not the natural order of things? If one's heart sickened at the discomfort and dirt and scarcity, the interminable winters, the stickiness of one's top of 60 socks, the lifts that never worked, the cold water, the gritty soap, the cigarettes that came to pieces, the food with its strange evil taste. Why should one feel it to be intolerable unless one had some kind of ancestral memory that things had once been different?